This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Hello, I'm Leen, ST's Associate Foreign Editor.
And I'm Tan Tam Mei, ST's Assistant Foreign Editor.
And you're listening to Asian Insider.
Welcome to another Asian Insider episode, where we go across the causeway to explore and discuss Malaysia's current affairs or trends on the fourth Friday of alternate months. Joining us today from KL are our Bureau Chief in Malaysia, Shannon Teoh, and special guest Dr Ong Kian Ming, a professor at Taylor's University and a former Deputy Minister with his very own popular podcast called Are We OK? Hello Shannon and hello Kian Ming.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Hi, hello. Good to have someone who actually knows how to do a podcast on the podcast. Yeah.
We'll learn from you, yeah.
Yeah, that's you, right, Shannon? Yeah.
So in this episode, we'll be talking about mainland Chinese being drawn to Malaysia to escape their stressful lives back home. We'll also cover the recent DAP party elections, with Kian Ming giving us an insider's perspective of what went down on March 16th.
So let's kick off with the MM2H scheme, which is somewhat of a golden visa scheme for Malaysia. And according to one of our reporters who did quite a few stories about Chinese in Malaysia, there are actually 26,000 mainland Chinese with this MM2H status as of December 2024. So this is actually a long-term visa that gives people residency rights in Malaysia if they meet certain financial requirements. That includes having a minimum fixed deposit of 150,000 US and also buying a property worth at least ringgit $600,000. So actually, these Chinese nationals, they make up the biggest group of people with MM2H status, and that's about 45%. So I just want to ask you all, why do you think that they are actually flocking to Malaysia, and why are they taking up this scheme? Why is it so popular?
Shannon, why do you start first? Then I'll back you up.
I'll start first so I can kind of give an outlay of what the article was about. And I hope I'm pronouncing things right. I had to ask Tamme how to pronounce this word. Nei-Chuan. Is that how you... Nei-Chuan?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry
You're forgiven.
about butchering the language. What the story was about was basically people escaping this kind of intense competitive life, the rat race in China, and coming to Malaysia where things are a bit more chillax lah. We Malaysians are very proud of that. We don't take things too seriously. The whole Malaysia boleh kind of attitude, right, which is always said ironically. No one says Malaysia boleh kind of seriously anymore. So I'm sure even Singaporeans come here to decompress in that sense. In the article, we have Chinese coming here, mainland Chinese or Chinese nationals. I'm not sure how to describe them because then we have Chinese in Malaysia who are Malaysians, right? So they're coming here. They kind of enjoy not having to be switched on 24/7, dealing with clients all the time, round the clock. Some are here so that their kids can attend private school because in China it's also very competitive. I think Singaporeans can relate to this. If you don't get to a certain elite school or a good school, then parents are worried about the future of their children, whether they will end up in blue-collar jobs instead of being professional. So they come to Malaysia. Private school fees here are much cheaper than, say, going to US, UK, stuff like that. And so the parents come here, bring their kids to school here. It's not as stressful as the Chinese school. Their parents' life is not as stressful as the workplace in China. And that seems to be the pull factor for Malaysia. That's what we discovered in our article. But I know, Kian Ming, what have you observed on your side?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I largely agree with what Shannon said just now. Just want to add a few more thoughts. For Shannon's edification, there's this phenomenon called Tang Ping. And I think
learn how to pronounce that as well.
lying flat, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Shannon knows the English reference, which is lying flat. That's a phenomenon that's happening in China, especially among the younger people, of not wanting to compete at the same level as what they see many of their peers doing. So, that could be part and parcel of the larger outward push on the part of Chinese nationals, not just leaving China to come to Malaysia or Southeast Asia, but we see this phenomenon happening in places like Japan, for example. So what draws them to Malaysia, I think, would be a few factors. Firstly, the fact that there's a large minority of Chinese-speaking population here that gives them the kind of cultural ability to be able to hire staff who can speak Chinese if they're starting businesses here. And for the sake of disclosure and transparency, On the education side as well, my own university is part and parcel of the larger Taylor's Education Group that has a number of private primary and secondary schools as well that benefit from the inflow of Chinese nationals coming to Malaysia to send their kids to study here. So whether it's for business, for social, for personal, I think Malaysia and Southeast Asia continues to be an attractive destination for many of these Chinese nationals.
So what do you think of the view that some people say it's because these wealthy Chinese are looking to park part of their wealth outside of the country?
I don't see a problem with that. This is one of the areas where they have found Singapore to be very attractive for the family office ecosystem. And Malaysia is trying to make a pitch for that as well through the special financial zone in Furore City in Johor. And I think as long as the due diligence is done properly in terms of anti-money laundering checks, there are, I think, two positive spillover effects that I can see. One is the development of the financial services sector that can cater to these family offices set up. And then secondly would be the spillover effects in terms of investment into the services and manufacturing ecosystem in Johor and also parts of Malaysia. Because sometimes you just don't want to keep your money in financial services. You want to deploy them in a more meaningful way in the larger economic ecosystem.
I think with every scheme, there are the good and the bad. So what are some of the benefits by having such a good response to this MM2H scheme? And maybe you can also talk about what are some of the drawbacks, especially with the big numbers that do come and how they affect local places and how things operate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a pro or a con, but you can definitely see a bit of a cultural shift in the landscape of where these guys are in Kuala Lumpur, in the city centre, places like Mont Kiara where they live, some of the more retail-y kind of places in the Klang Valley like Cheras. So you do see the landscape changing, the Chinese restaurants, the businesses, the retail side also popping
All
up.
the Mishas coming up.
I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or bad thing. I don't know how people necessarily look at it. I think for those who are more adventurous, we do like saying, hey, there's this new place, a new place. There are these conversations where I go for dinner. We always, the mainstream kind of Malaysian Chinese cuisine is Cantonese right? That's kind of the most mainstream. But it's quite exciting to suddenly see food from different provinces and trying different things. But I think there is also, of course, the people who feel like everyone is like that. You don't like, if you've been living in this neighborhood for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, suddenly things are different from what they were before, and then you complain. Just like we will complain, suddenly my neighborhood got a lot of traffic because this new condo came up and whatever, right? It's all this NIMBY stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you get that. But I feel like there's no real clash because where are the Chinese nationals going, right? They're going to places which already have a lot of foreigners, Mont Kiara, so on and so forth, expat community areas, or they're going to places which is already quite high, the demographic there is already quite Chinese, right? So they're finding these places. And I think the kind of cultural clashes that they will happen, they always happen, but they're not so deep, right? It's not a case of people, what are these foreigners doing sort of thing. It's not up in arms with pitchforks and things like that.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Shannon said just now by saying that many of these sort of like more retail presence of Chinese shops, especially hotpots and things like that, they also help the property sector because many of them are located in new apartment and also shopping mall developments. So other than Mont Kiara, which is the more atas or the more upmarket place that Shannon likes to hang out at. I prefer to go to places like Sunway Velocity in Cheras, more the sort of like middle class people. And then you get to see a more broad-based variety of different nationals, different international audiences, including Chinese nationals who are there. And of course, it's very apparent that many of these shops are catering to Chinese nationals because the signs are primarily in Chinese, and a lot of them are advertising like their services using Chinese as the predominant language.
Actually, how about the, let's say, non-Chinese Malaysians? I've heard there are some Chinese brands that bring in halal food, and they're actually something that even the non-Chinese in Malaysia do want to try because there's access and all that. Have you all noticed such things?
Yeah, I think there is a sense of it is somehow having Chinese food is quite aspirational for certain non-Chinese also. to have this kind of cuisine that is a bit different and to access cuisine that you couldn't before. So you see all popping up a lot of mee tarik places, which is basically la mian, right? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But
very Japanese sounding, but okay.
And for the longest time, we've always had kind of Chinese Muslim Chinese food, in a banquet style sort of things. But it is a growing market, so there's certainly demand. People are curious. Of course, for Malaysian Muslims, there is still the kind of apprehension, halal or not.
Yeah.
But you get a lot of them who actually have genuine halal certificates. I think our former Prime Minister Ismail Sabri also was promoting one of the restaurants. I think this is something that is enjoyed by the wider community. But again, like I said, we've yet to reach that point of cultural clashes. There might be some discomfort in certain areas, but I think largely it's been a good thing for Malaysia.
I'm a fan of Lanzhou La Mian.
Yes, that's the one.
There are a number of outlets here in Malaysia, including one at the shopping mall that I frequent quite regularly.
Yeah.
And I also like to bring in another point, which is many Chinese brands are actually looking to grow their brand awareness and brand presence in Southeast Asia. And for Malaysia and Indonesia and other countries like this, you can't just approach it using a very Chinese or China-centric value proposition. You have to try to make the brand a little bit more local and using maybe more international ways of marketing these brands. I'll give you an example of how a Chinese brand called XTEP, XTEP, is one of the two largest running shoe brands that is from Xiamen in my home province. My grandparents came from near there in Fujian. They are coming into Southeast Asia. They are expanding in Malaysia as well. And they do want to try to reach out, of course, to the larger population here, which will include non-Chinese as well. Maybe shifting tack a bit. This one is more for the non-Muslim population here in Malaysia. There's a very popular Chinese brand called Wu Liang Ye. It's a baijiu. And, as part and parcel of their international expansion, they are trying to do things like Wu Liang Ye pairing in terms of just like wine pairing, you have a more local pairing. I attended one recently where it's a Wu Liang Ye pairing with bak kut teh. Right? So it's quite interesting to see how these kinds of brands are trying to localize.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick on two of the points that you raised, Kian Ming. So the first on property. I have this little anecdote from a friend of mine who lives in one of those leafy suburbs in KL, put up the family home for sale, and they found that 80% of the viewers who came to look at the house were mainland Chinese. So this was good for him because it sparked a bidding war and they closed at a price that was 20% above asking. It was also great, obviously, for the estate agent, but the estate agent did mention that the mainland Chinese clients are a lot more demanding. They require a lot of wining, dining, touring around KL before they finally close. So good for the estate agent as well. So I guess my question is, maybe this might not be so good for local Malaysians who are looking to upgrade. And then if they think, finally I've got enough to get there, and then to find that the price is pushed another 20% up.
Yeah, a couple of responses to that. I think firstly, the kind of property inflation that we see in Malaysia as a result of demand from foreigners is much less compared to what Singapore has been experiencing, especially post-COVID, where you have an influx of expatriates coming from Hong Kong and India and also mainland China. I think it's much more muted, much more subdued in Malaysia. At the same time, we can see that the expansion of housing stock, including in the mid and upper tiers, continues to be quite healthy. So, we see property prices expand maybe at about 3-10% at most. So it's still manageable. And I think this kind of foreign interest is good for the larger property market, which desperately needs a boost. And then the other thing would be, second response would be, I think the Chinese investors are also becoming more astute when they come to Malaysia, in the sense that they are wanting to invest in, for example, property or apartments in downtown KL for the purposes of renting out via Airbnb. And many developers are looking at these options, even catering their services for this particular market. And that's a good thing. And I think that's a good way in which we can have a healthy sort of investment space where the apartments are being used by tourists and others as well. And I would say that the upsides are much more than the downsides at this point in time.
Okay. So then the second point I wanted to pick up on, where you're talking about all the Chinese brands coming in and all that, right? So in terms of sensitivities, there's been that furore over Chinese language signage. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think the whole issue of Chinese language signage has been a phenomenon that's happened in KL for a long, long time. There are many of these coffee shops that are owned by Malaysian Chinese that have Chinese words that are more prominent. Of course, most of them do have a Malay or English lettering as well. But I think one of the reasons why this issue has become a little bit hotter of late is because our former Prime Minister, Tun Dr. Mahathir, has given this attention on his social media when he visited a shopping mall, maybe the same one that I visited. Somebody may have brought him there. And then he would have seen a row of these mala shops, mostly in Chinese lettering, and he thinks he's gone into Chinatown or he's gone to China. In fact, that particular shopping mall that I went to, the name of the road is called Nanjing Lu.
Oh, wow.
It's an internal road, So I think it's good to have this kind of flavor. Of course, if let's say you do want to localize, it would be good to have at least some lettering besides the Chinese script. So that incurred a little bit of backlash on the part of the local authorities here in Kuala Lumpur. They made some noise, but I don't think they've implemented this particular ruling very aggressively and across all kinds of different shops, whether they are owned by Malaysians or non-Malaysians in Kuala Lumpur.
Actually, in fact, DBKL had started to clamp down before Tun Mahathir made noise in that sense. They had posted on social media how they had gone around to different places, and sometimes a bit sucky kind of social media posts like already warned so many times, still don't understand, that sort of thing, right? But it didn't really gain traction. No one is following the DBKL Facebook page, put it that way. Why would you do that, right? So, but it was after Mahathir said something that then DBKL found that, this issue got traction now. So then they went in a bit stricter and sterner and started asking all these restaurants to take down the signboards, issuing them fines. And they did, right? On Jalan Imbi and all that. You could see all these new signages coming out. I think the bylaw is that you must have more prominent Malay signage than any other language. That's all the ruling is. But recently also suddenly it became politicized again. And there was a bit of a war of words between the Malaysian Chinese Association and the Democratic Action Party, both trying to champion and say that we are championing Chinese signboards. We are not going to let it just disappear. I think it happened both in KL because of for the Chinatown, exactly the Chinatown signage at Petaling Street, and also in Kampa, a weird place because some community center or something like that, right, in Trono, middle of nowhere, basically. Sorry for people from Trono, but it is middle of nowhere, where while it was undergoing renovation, the Chinese sign came down or something like that. And there was a big ruckus. Anyway, the local representatives there are from DAP, so I think MCA took advantage of that to say, you say you protect Chinese culture or whatever, but then it didn't happen. And then DAP shot back and that kind of stuff. So this stuff has gotten some kind of political traction as well. It's not just about, as we started this conversation about social clashes and social change, but it has become a political issue.
Yeah, just to add on to what Shannon said, this has been an issue in the past in ways that doesn't involve the so-called Chinese nationals coming to Malaysia. Shannon will remember how, for example, the Sultan of Selangor made his views known on road signs that were in more than one languages. And this was done in Selangor, in some of the new villages, to reflect the nature of the new villages. And I think the Sultan of Selangor said that this shouldn't be something that should be implemented across the whole state. Whereas if, let's say, you go to a place like Sarawak, there are absolutely no problems there in terms of having road signs that are both in Malay and in Chinese. So there's this kind of different kind of local politics that's happening.
So this space of signages can be full of landmines for businesses, how to also navigate the local sensitivities. I think that's more it than the actual bylaws. If no one actually makes noise, then the local authorities also just shrug it.
And also, a bit sensitive and also tricky for the politicians as well. I think Shannon would know this. Some of my former colleagues who are DAP elected reps, they were very against the inclusion of Jawi in signboards. But then after DAP and Pakatan Harapan became part of the state government in Pahang, this issue suddenly wasn't an issue anymore.
Yes. So speaking of the politics of convenience, right? So the DAP, since we have Kian Ming here, who is a party insider, the DAP has been in the ruling government for the last 2 years or so. And of course, observations have been made that, you've had to tone down a little bit of that street fighter attitude and try and work together with the other allies within the ruling coalition. After all, this is the party with the most number of MPs in parliament within the ruling coalition, Pakatan Harapan. And the DAP also had its internal elections on March 16th. So, Shannon, for the benefit of those who haven't been paying attention, give us the 101 on the DAP and its role on Malaysian politics today, after which we'll move to Kian Ming to give us the insider info.
Yeah, from a reporter perspective or even as an average Malaysian, I think the view of DAP for decades and decades has been so entrenched is that they are the opposition party. They're very loud, vociferous. They fight for everything lah, good governance, social justice, equitability for the downtrodden, etc., etc. Malaysia, and there's so much stuff that DAP, of whether they're elected representatives or their party leaders, they have been probably the loudest voices on this sort of opposition issues in that sense lah. But this, as you mentioned, this kind of street fighter image, has been toned down since they started tasting power, shall we say, and stopped being just a pure opposition party. They were of course, they over Penang 2008. So that's coming up. It's more than 15 years ago now. And also finally were in federal government after 2018, in and out, and they're back for over, as you mentioned, over the past 2 years. So for this party polls, it feels different from previous party polls. Previous party polls were like, so who is going to be leading this opposition party, right? This party poll is about who is going to be leading a party that's in power, who is going to be in cabinets, whether it's federal or state cabinets around the country, has more at stake. So it felt more like, for want of a better comparison, an UMNO party election, because UMNO has always been in power, and whoever wins, whoever takes office in UMNO takes office in government. So I think there was a kind of underlying tone of this party elections about whether members or delegates still want kind of like the old style, kind of exemplified by Lim Guan Eng, Mr. Opposition himself, and being very loud and vocal on issues, and also to an extent his more successful son in that sense, who has been Penang Chief Minister, he has been Finance Minister even, which is the highest position ever reached by a non-Malay in Malaysia. And whether delegates still wanted that style or more, I wouldn't say, painting the Secretary General Anthony Loke like as if he's a pushover, but someone who is more willing to compromise, get things done through discussion rather than marching down the streets, right? I mean, we saw the results coming in. It does look like as if the party wanted the latter, but I don't know whether Kian Ming has something more inside stories of how we got to those results, because I think Guan Eng finished 26, quite low on the list. And people kind of closer to Anthony Loke were seen higher on the list.
Thanks, Shannon. I just wanted to remind Shannon that it is no longer Mr. Lim Guan Eng, it is Tan Sri Lim Guan
Tan Sri
Eng.
Dato Sri Utama Lim Guan Eng. I apologize.
So no longer Mr. Opposition, but
Tan Sri Opposition, is it?
No, part and parcel of the establishment now, right? To be able to receive that kind of...
and it is kind of weird to actually say this phrase, right? Malaysia's largest ruling party, DAP. It just still feels weird whenever I write it or say it, because that's not what I think of when I think of DAP.
Yeah, so I think from a more insider's kind of perspective, one has to remember that in the context of the recent CEC or Central Executive Committee elections that just took place yesterday, many of the delegates and also members that have joined the DAP and are part and parcel of that ecosystem joined after 2008. And after the 2008 general elections, where DAP became the part of the state governments in Penang, Selangor, and then for a very short time, Perak. Now, we zoom forward to 2018. That was when DAP became part and parcel of the federal government for the first time in Malaysian history. And for that short 2 years, 22 months, Lim Guan Eng was the finance minister. I was his special officer for a couple of months before I was appointed as deputy minister for the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Now it's called Ministry of Investments, Trade and Industry. So that I think started the process of mainstreaming DAP, so to speak. But in that process of mainstreaming, there's always been this tension between those who say that, oh, we must make sure that DAP doesn't become like an MCA 2.0, meaning just to be quiet and to not fight the good fight and to promote the different kinds of interests that DAP has always been promoting in two buckets. One large bucket would be the area of promoting good governance and transparency, and the other large bucket would be trying to promote an inclusive society with an emphasis on the rights of the non-Muslim population here in Malaysia. Right, so that tension, I think, continues. Of course, as more and more people who join the DAP and who are voting delegates see themselves as part and parcel of the government and wanting to contribute positively to the government, the side that says, oh, we have to speak up at all costs, may find itself in a bit more of a minority. And that could be, some of the contestation that was like being pitched at the public level in the recent DAP-CEC elections, where I think you could see Lim Guan Eng sort of like positioning himself as somebody who is a leader within the party, but not part of the governing establishment. And that gives him more room to, for example, voice out certain points of view that the ministers themselves, the deputy ministers themselves, cannot voice out because they are in government. And sort of like opposing him would be some of these younger leaders who are trying to do their best to be part of government and also wanting to see the party move in a certain direction that is reflective of playing a more positive role within government rather than having to shout out every time something happens that party members and our DAP's supporters may not like. Don't know whether Shannon would, agree.
But doesn't that really sound like MCA 2.0 though? MCA has always said that, right? We are in government. You have to be inside to change the system. You cannot change it from outside, so on and so forth. And that they still represent Chinese interests lah. If you don't vote for MCA, there'll be no Chinese in government. We always hear that refrain from MCA previously. Of course, DAP is not a Chinese party per se, but of course, within the Pakatan Harapan structure, it does probably do the most to champion the interests of the non-Malay Muslim majority lah. So all this sounds very familiar, and I'm wondering exactly where do, as you said, the younger leaders, the new cohort, whatever 3G, 4G leadership that's coming in with Anthony Loke, how do they define the difference between them and their leadership style, or how they work within this ruling coalition, as it were, that we have now, which is a messy coalition of coalitions, versus how MCA operated. I'm not trying to say MCA was bad or good, or that's not the, but if DAP seems to have this allergy of being called MCA 2.0, right? So how is it different? Or at least how are these leaders narrating how they are different?
Yeah. I think those are all very relevant questions, Shannon. I would have a couple of responses to that. And they would generally be responses towards my sentiment, and I've said this in public as well, my understanding that DAP is not in danger of becoming MCA 2.0 yet, right? And the reasons are as follows. Firstly, I think one of the things that made MCA much less effective in terms of its governing influence is over time, you saw a steady but sure creeping in of money politics and personal interests are being put ahead of party interests and also community interests. And once that seeps in, once that becomes part and parcel of that structure, you make decisions based on those kinds of interests. I'm not saying that DAP is immune from this kind of money politics. In fact, I've heard some stories that this is has been a little bit more prevalent during these party elections, but it's not come to that level of seriousness yet. And this is why I think it's important for the party to think about putting things like a code of conduct in terms of how DAP party leaders, especially those in government, should approach the process of governing, right? So that's one response. I think the second response would be that DAP has, I think, a very robust internal discussion on how to project itself as a more inclusive party. And this is something that MCA never really had to struggle with. And DAP has to face that question because of the large number of Indian elected reps, for example, more than MIC ever had at the state and the federal levels. And then now increasingly, DAP also has a number of Malay elected reps. So for example, in my former constituency of Bangi, the elected representative is a young lawyer by the name of Sharizan Johan, who made it to the CEC top 30 this time. And also another Malay representative who made it was young Safura, a woman MP from the state of Pahang in a constituency called Bentong. So these are the kinds of discussions that are being undertaken. And I think the new leadership under Anthony Loke, second time around as Secretary General, would want to have a robust continuation of this discussion to make sure that DAP hopefully becomes more and more inclusive as a reflection of the changing demographics in Malaysia as well, where the non-Malay population as a percentage is becoming less and less. So not in danger of becoming MCA 2.0 at this point in time, but we don't know what the future holds.
Actually, so both of y'all were on the ground yesterday night, I assume, right? Yeah, I know Shannon was.
Evening,
evening.
No, I was playing pickleball while waiting for the results.
All right. Good use of your time. So I'm just wondering, what was sentiment like in terms of where Mr. Lim Guan Eng ended up in terms of the votes from 8th in 2022 to 26? Was it a bit nail-biting on the ground, or were people expecting it, that he will make the top 30, and what was the feel like?
I think most, whether no matter how distant you are, as long as you were paying any kind of attention and that you knew a CC election was coming, you knew that Guan Eng was not in as strong a position as he was in 2022.
Correct.
When, according to some observers, he kicked out people like Kian Ming from the CEC. So, so at that time, he was very strong. He could kind of command enough votes to, in fact, pretty much decide who is in the leadership, right? The 30-man Central Executive Committee. And this time, he was facing an uphill battle just to stay in the CEC. That was kind of the prevailing view. I know some long-time DAP members, they were even thinking maybe he might not even make it. So I don't know what Guan Eng thought of his own chances. I think he was always still quite confident that he'll make it, but whether he could retain his chairmanship, I think if he was being honest with himself, he realized that it was going to be an uphill battle. But I think the significance of all this is that the delegates really kind of have, it appears to me like we are looking at it as a kind of a break from the past, the different style of leadership, so on and so forth. But I also think that there's an element, what is more right in front of the delegates was that I think SecGen Anthony Loke wants so-and-so people to be in his leadership to help him run the party with him. So let's vote for these guys. So I think a lot of the if you look at the top 30, a lot of the people who are seen as people that Anthony Loke can work with and are supportive of got into the CEC. So it is, I wouldn't say that, it's Anthony Loke party, he's the new emperor of DAP or anything like that. But there seems to be this sense of, let's unite. It's Anthony Loke's turn now. Guan Eng was our leader before. It's Anthony Loke's turn now. So let's give him all the support we can. I feel that is definitely a very strong signal from the votes.
Yeah, just to add on, for the record, and I've said this publicly in other places and platforms, before the previous CC elections in 2022, I actually told Guan Eng in private that I didn't want to contest again in 2022. I also thanked him for the opportunities he gave to me as a member of parliament, allowing me to run twice with your Secretary General, and then also putting my name in as deputy minister candidate. And then the final thing I told him was that I don't think he should have taken up the position of chairman for the party after in the 2022 elections. And that's probably what got me kicked out of the CEC or not in the favoured list, which on hindsight, I'm actually very grateful for, because it's allowed me to go out and seek other opportunities that I think is part and parcel of my personal development and journey. Ending up here at Taylor's and also doing a couple of consultancy.
And playing pickleball, right?
And playing pickleball on weekends. So I have my weekends back, which is very important for me and my family, and also for my physical and mental health. So I think for me, Guan Eng was probably about like a 50-50 to get in, and probably I thought that on the whole he would be able to get in because there's still enough support for him among some of the local grassroots leaders, as the older ones especially. But the bigger challenge was actually the fact that people who would want to support Guan Eng as chairman, wanting to see Guan Eng's influence continue to remain high within the CEC, I think that was always going to be an uphill task. For those who may not know, a couple of older and more senior DAP leaders, including the former chairman of the DAP, Tan Kok Wai, who's the MP for Cheras, and also the former treasurer of the DAP, who's also the member of parliament for Bukit Bintang. They've been in politics for a long time, and they decided not to contest in the CC this time round, which gave room for others to come in. And more importantly, these were seen as people that may have supported Guan Eng in his bid to continue as chairman. And then there were other people that aligned themselves with Guan Eng that didn't get in as well. People like Teresa Kok, for example, also another more senior leader in the DAP, and somebody like Raya, who's the MP for Jelutong, also seen as a diehard Lim Guan Eng supporter, and maybe one or two others. I think what we have right now is basically the waning influence of not just Guan Eng, but maybe one can say the Lim family as well, because his sister Lim Hui Ying failed to get into the top 30 as well. And I think this is part and parcel of a generational change within the DAP, which I think is a good thing in the sense that you can see that the DAP can go on to have a more firm and solid lineup of younger leaders taking charge at different in different roles in the party, and at the same time, Guan Eng still having some role to play as an advisor. And I hope that he can see this opportunity to transition himself to more of a statesman figure within the DAP and within the coalition, rather than wanting to continue this kind of fighter mode, which, frankly speaking, doesn't help him, doesn't help the party, and doesn't help the government. So, yeah, changing of the guard, more solidarity for Anthony's vision and mission. And one has to remember, Anthony only has 2 more terms left to serve as Secretary General, because this would be the second of a 3-term limit that Secretary Generals of the DAP had.
So does that mean you can make a comeback, Kian Ming, into the DAP, CEC, and maybe run for elected office again?
Oh, yeah. I think it really depends on on what my colleagues in the DAP think of me and my new podcasting, voice. Yeah. But I continue to be engaged with my friends from the DAP, probably playing more of an advisory role and still trying to give advice on some policy-related issues. So, yeah, I remain...
So now Guan Eng has taken your role as advisor to the party. So maybe you can take a different role in the party now.
Yeah, maybe Guan Eng is more, political advice. I'm more like a policy advisory, different sort of roles. Yeah. Yeah, we can have a chat about this over drinks,
Yeah, so actually it's quite interesting. The same way, Kian Ming, you via your podcast, freer in a sense to voice your views on certain things, right? As you say, on policy. So now Guan Eng's going to be advisor. So are we going to see a situation where the DAP might be silent on an issue, or perhaps agree with its coalition ruling government allies on a certain issue, but the DAP advisor voicing a different view?
I think Guan Eng would still have a role to play, maybe not in the same vociferous kind of voice of resistance, so to speak, more of what he did when he knew his term in the CEC was coming to an end. Just chime out on specific issues and not on all issues that maybe do not befit the stature of somebody like Guan Eng, and leave some of the more smaller stuff to younger leaders who may not be in the CAC, for example. The youth chief, the new youth chief for the DAP, who is a state assembly representative in the state of Perak, he's been going after the UMNO youth chief on certain issues, going after PAS on certain issues. He's taken a much more aggressive position. And maybe that's the way that DAP wants to show that it still can have a voice, but at the same time also be a responsible part of government. Yeah. So hopefully Guan Eng will be able to delegate some of those responsibilities to others, and he can play a different kind of role moving forward.
Yeah.
There was something within, I think, a Lok speech where he mentioned maybe it's time not to have a minister, because now DAP is in cabinet, a minister to also be our parliamentary leader. I think he mentioned something like that in his speech, and that because now Dr Ong Kian Ming is the parliamentary leader, and to have this role of DAP parliamentary leader to be a backbencher. And so to be able to lead debate, quote unquote, on government policy, not necessarily opposing government policy, but to call for improvements and things like that. And I just feel like Guan Eng is perfect for that role. He's been in government before, in a very top position, all the way up to chief executive of a state, a finance minister. And also he's still very vocal. So he can go into parliament and whatever kind of bills that come out, and he has the stature to speak on those bills, and to, if he canvasses the backbenchers, see what their opinion is, he will get a very early, when they debate and they list who can debate, because of his seniority, he will be able to speak very early and actually set the tone and agenda of the debate for that particular bill. So I just feel like this is a perfect role for him.
Yeah, and in fact, there were suggestions that he take up a similar role in 2022. But of course, he felt that the chairman position was more befitting of him. And he may have been right at that particular point in time. Now, given the fact that Anthony Loke has made that speech to say that the parliamentary leader shouldn't be a deputy minister or minister, I think, Shannon, you're right. Somebody like Guan Eng would fit that role very well. But I think this is also where some of the nuances comes in. If he can change his mindset, whereby the number one priority is not to be combative for the sake of being combative and to make sure he flies the opposition mindset flag, but to be able to coordinate the different MPs, not just himself, but other backbenchers as well, to give them line of sight on how to speak and deliberate and debate on certain issues with a more proactive and also more constructive views to be put on the table. That I think can be a very good mark and legacy that he can leave behind, because he knows the MPs well. He knows who can speak on what, how they can use their own personalities and their own strengths to project a good voice that can be a good representation of the DAP, of Pakatan Harapan in Parliament and to the larger public. We'll have to wait and see to see whether he can adapt to this role if it's given to him.
Okay, I'm thinking of the other elder statesman who continues to, give his usual caustic jibes and remarks and very strong opinions about things, and has also just launched his own podcast. So
yeah, but he's not a member of parliament.
Yes. So we look forward to seeing how Guan Eng carves out a role for himself.
Yeah, and for a record, I don't think Tun Mate is a very good example in terms of being an elder statesman. Yeah.
Okay, that rounds up the heavy political stuff. It's now time for our news nugget segment. So the quirky news this episode is a British woman brought 28 kilos of snacks from Malaysia back home to London. And she revealed her stash on TikTok, opened up her bag, and then started bringing out Milo, Mi Sedap, and Kopiko sweets. What we want to find out is, Tamme, as a Singaporean, can you relate? What's your top Malaysian snack to bring back to Singapore?
28 kg, that's like a small child, right? The worth of snacks.
Yes,
28 kg is more than like your allowance.
Unless you fly
normal
SQ.
luggage allowance, right? So she must have, I don't know
30
what she...
kilo SQ.
Yeah. Oh, SQ gets 30 kilo.
Okay, but anyway, so my top snack from Malaysia is Super Ring. I love the artificial cheese taste. It's my thing. So yeah, Super Ring is still the way to go for me. I still buy it once in a while.
So if you're going to go full process.
Yeah, don't pretend, natural coloring. No, it's okay. Just hit me with the good stuff. Don't worry. Yeah. So how about y'all? What y'all bring? If you...
Shannon, why do you go first?
Yeah.
Mine is very boring, and it also betrays kind of my love of the East Coast. If I ever have, every time I do a kind of trip to Malaysia, which was all of COVID, right, for 2 or 3 years, I invariably end up in the East Coast and things like that. I just like it. It's the same way Singaporeans who come to Malaysia to decompress. I go to the East Coast to decompress. And one thing you'll always find at any kind of kedai runcit or even like a big kind of a market, and they'll be full of this thing called krepek ubi pedas, which is basically spicy tapioca chips, right? So you sell them in big packets, small packets, whatever you like. And there's the drier kind, there's a wet kind. There's a bit of range. Some are sweeter, some are spicier. But it's so addictive.
The transparent one, right? Yeah. The little...
Yeah, the packaging is
the
transparent.
red, it's super red.
Yeah, you see
Red
these
and
tapioca
sticky.
chips which
Yeah.
are red.
Yeah.
So again, like the super rings, you can tell this is not natural, right? It's red like it came out of a chemical factory. But it is everything, right? It's crunchy, it's savory, it's sweet, it's spicy. Like it's got all the quote unquote Malaysian flavors. You eat anything in Malaysia must have all of this, right? So if I was stuck on a desert island or stuck on, let's just say, since we're on the East Coast team, like on Rendang or Tioman somewhere, I got nothing else, I will open bundles of this stuff. Kerepek ubi pedas.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not really a big fan of very hot stuff. If I were to go to the East Coast, probably get a lot of keropok leko. But if let's say I were to be stranded on a desert island, hopefully Shannon is not too bad of a company lah. But I can think of other people who are not as pleasant. So I probably prefer to be alone. I would take probably two things, and I'm going to cheat a bit. My Malaysian snack would be definitely Mami vegetarian noodles. I love that. A little bit peppery. It's a Malaysian product made in Malacca. So that would be one. And then the other one would be a dry snack. Irwin's salted eggs, crisps or chips. That is my go-to when I go to Singapore.
Controversial.
Come back from Changi, buy a bit of that. Spend some of my Singapore dollars and get some of those snacks to treat myself. So those two things, Mummies and Irwin's.
Wow.
Yay for Singapore.
I'm sure Malaysia has their own though, like own version of salted egg, but maybe not so branded,
but not
in that sense.
Yeah. So I think what we're looking forward to is actually inviting them to open a factory in the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone lah. Then Malaysians can say, oh, this is also a Malaysian snack and eat it everywhere and still feel patriotic. Right?
Yeah, they might actually.
This Paris baguette, they really set up some sort of a manufacturing center in Johor already.
Correct.
So Irwin's, come on, man.
Hey, Old Chunky is there. Old Chunky is there.
Yeah, like Old Chunky,
Yes.
exactly. Right? Let's get to sharing all this stuff.
Yeah, we'll share.
So then,
Yeah.
and it'll probably be cheaper, right? I think isn't that the sell for special
I
economic
think so,
zone?
definitely.
Costs
Yeah,
will
yeah.
go down.
Yeah, it should be the equivalent price in ringgit rather than in Sing dollars, right? So 10 ringgit instead of 10 Sing
cannot
dollars.
lah.
Cannot.
We always do, but the 2/3 rule. So if it's 10 Sing dollars, that translates to about 33 ringgit, I think now.
Okay lah, 20
so it
ringgit.
should cost only 22. Then that's a fair price. I think the 2/3 rule.
Shannon,
Yeah.
can this Irwin's manufacturing facility, can it be sort of like parked under one of the 50 projects for the GSSEZ and then maybe get incentives from both MIDA and EDB, right?
I'm not sure, right? Because our agreement is supposed to be some high value and high...
It's high value.
High value.
It is
10
expensive.
I think somebody has to write the business paper and convince...
I think that's why Kian Ming is asking you, Shannon.
I'm you know the incentive scheme better and how to game it.
Yeah, and the salted egg will be cheaper in Johor also.
Yeah. Hey, Eileen, what about you? What are you going to bring?
Yeah, I hate to be a dampener, but I'm also, I'm not a huge snack person. I do like rempeyek, but you can find that in Indonesia as well as Singapore and Malaysia, but it, of course I have to say the Malaysian one tastes the best. So it has, it's that round thing which has got ikan bilis and kacang in it and it's deep fried. You can't go wrong with deep fried. Yeah, that's my go-to snack.
Sounds good.
Oh
sounds good.
man, I'm so hungry.
Okay.
I think it's almost lunchtime.
So that's all we have for you this week. Thanks, Shannon, and our special guest, Kian Ming, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, and I hope this won't be the last time I appear on this podcast.
Yeah, if we can't get someone for me, we'll just invite you back in.
Sure, happy to fill in for you, Shannon. Yeah, I can promise I can pronounce the
Chinese words properly.
Practice,
Yes, much
That's
better.
not saying much. That's not really, you can't put it on your CV. Pronounce
that's
Chinese
true.
words better.
Yes,
That's true.
yes. No, very good to have you, Kian Ming, and we definitely will invite you back again. You've been listening to Asian Insider. I'm Leen.
And I'm Tan Tam Mei. We have links to the articles we mentioned throughout in our podcast show notes, and you can check them out too.
If you liked what you heard, please share this podcast with your friends and family.
This episode was produced and edited by Faiza Sani. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.